POWERinU to empower yourself and your teams.
Hello, everyone. I am June Marfori. I am an executive coach, trainer, consultant, and a director of POWERinU Philippines. And I would like to welcome you to this complimentary webinar, The Sailboat Metaphor, a tool for self-reflection. Without further ado, let me introduce our speaker for tonight, today, this afternoon, or this evening, wherever you may be joining us from. Our speaker tonight has worked with multinational companies in the Philippines and across the Asia-Pacific region. He has worked for companies such as Sterling Winthrop Philippines, which is now part of GlaxoSmithKline, Bristol Myers Squibb and Mead Johnson Nutrition, now part of Reckitt Beckintzer. He was also the Senior Vice President for Human Resources of Felix Mining Corporation before founding and starting POWERinU Philippines. He is a certified executive coach, a certified practitioner in emotional intelligence of Genus International, a certified facilitator in Strength Deployment Inventory, or what we call Total SDI, and he is also the president of POWERinU Training and Coaching Philippines Incorporated. Everyone, let us all please welcome our speaker for this evening, Mr. Benji Garcia.
Thank you very much, June. Thank you for that generous introduction. Only a good friend would dare to actually share. And good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining us in tonight's webinar. Trina will be helping me out in terms of controlling the slides. So Trina, can we move to our first slide? Our cover slide talks about the sailboat metaphor, which I think intrigued many of you based on the questions that advanced questions that we have actually received. So we'll get right down to it. The first thing that I'd like to talk a bit about is the term metaphor. In fact, we received the question, what is a metaphor? And maybe for most of us, we actually encounter this. I don't really know what the Filipino word for metaphor is. Maybe somebody who might be familiar with it could type it in the chat box, but I have yet to Google it. So I'm not, I must confess, I don't know what the Filipino word for metaphor is. But I'm sure that many of us actually encounter this in some shape and form in our daily lives. To give you an idea, I'd like to ask Trina to actually show our next slide, which is actually a quote. This is a quote from a book written by Richelle Goodrich, who is an American author, a poet, and I'll read it to you also. The only ship you can truly steer is in this ocean is the one you're sailing. Quit trying to alter the winds. Harness them. I'd like to ask you at this point to just tell us what you think of this particular quote from Ms. Goodrich. And to do that, to gather your responses, we'll launch a poll. And please, in a few seconds, please type in choose your answer. There are only 4 options that we provided, so it should be fairly quick. Trina, if you please could please launch the poll, so our participants can make their choice. Okay, can I ask the participants to choose from any of the 4 answers? Just choose one, please.
Not sure, Bench, that we're seeing the poll unless the participants can confirm that you're seeing the poll. Is the poll up there?
Yes, the poll is up. We have 28 who answered already out of the 39 who are here.
Thank you.
Oh, okay, okay. Thank you, Trina. Okay, why don't we close that? And I'm not seeing it, but maybe Trina can call out the answer. Okay, now I'm seeing the results. All right, interesting. So please share these results. I think everyone's seeing it. So majority actually chose the first answer, compares a person's life to a ship or sailboat. Can also be sailing in an ocean, being a challenge, and that's the second choice. We have someone who is being very honest. Thank you for saying, I have no idea what it actually means, and it's none of the above. So what does this metaphor, this quote actually say? In essence, on the surface, you might actually be correct in choosing the second answer, because it's actually talking about sailing, and that sailing in an ocean is challenging, because indeed it is. It's a challenging task, particularly if you are encountering high rough seas and strong winds. But on a deeper level, the author, Ms. Goodrich, is actually talking about the first answer, using the sailboat as an example or as a metaphor to compare a person's life to a ship. So that is an example. This is an example of a metaphor, a figure of speech, as you were saying, that makes that comparison, because you have an understanding at the surface level, which is correct, but then you have another meaning that you can actually use to interpret it. So in essence, many of you, I think, were able to get the right answer. And that's an example of the use of a metaphor. So Trina, can we move to the next slide, please? So what are we going to cover in this webinar? Well, we've already talked a little bit about the concept of a metaphor. But let me talk a little bit about self-reflection. Again, another topic, really, but since it is part of our title, we also got a lot of questions talking about the idea of asking for clarification on what is self-reflection and what it has to do with the sailboat metaphor. So this evening, we'll talk a little bit about self-reflection as a starting point, but then we'll devote a lot of our time to understanding the metaphor itself. And by doing that, we will study the different elements that make up this particular metaphor or model, if you will, because that's another simpler term that you can use for the sailboat metaphor. And then we'll spend a little bit of time towards the end to practice how it can be applied. I will first demonstrate some examples in which it can be applied, and then we'll ask the participants. Hopefully, some of you will be game in terms of trying this out, so that we can get a better sense of our understanding of what the metaphor can do for us and how to use it. And then we'll leave the floor open for questions and answers, depending on how much time we have. So let's get right down to the sailboat metaphor. As mentioned in our introduction, the sailboat metaphor is actually something is a tool developed by Dr. Hugo Alberts of the Maastricht University in the Netherlands. He is a professor of psychology, and he's also a co-founder of positivepsychology.com. So I encountered this model as part of a program delivered by Dr. Alberts, talking about the different concepts of positive psychology. And the tool itself is actually something that he presented as a tool that one can actually use for the helping profession. What do I mean by the helping profession? We're talking about coaches, counselors, psychologists, therapists, and the like. So that's what he's referring to as the helping profession. But I also felt that on our own, we may be able to use this tool to help us with self-reflection. Can you move to the next slide or click the next slide, Trina? Okay. So as you have seen in the concept of the metaphor, we are really talking about using an object in place of another object to establish a likeness or an analogy between these two particular objects. So we will be making use of the idea of a captain in a sailboat in a journey to actually describe human functioning. And what is human functioning? When we talk about human functioning here, we are talking about how we as individuals perceive, process, and respond or react to our experiences, our feelings, our thoughts, our beliefs. So that's a very broad term or definition when we talk about that, when we use the term human functioning. And in this metaphor, there are actually three main components, as you can see on the slide. The first one is the boat. The second one is the captain, symbolized by the captain's hat. And of course, there's also the lighthouse. Now, in this particular session, we will be concentrating on the first two elements, the boat and the captain. And we'll spend a little bit of time in the end on the lighthouse, but our focus for this session is actually on the first two elements of the metaphor. Okay. I believe Trina has sent out the material, a description of this model, this metaphor in advance, and also on the chat box. So if you wish, you can download that and so you can follow along. So why this metaphor from the point of view of Dr. Alberts? So I'm not sure how familiar we are with the field of positive psychology, but within that field of positive psychology, there are actually a lot of different concepts. When you talk about positive psychology, you're talking about things such as resilience, you're talking about emotional intelligence, meaning and value of life, mindfulness, and many other things that are actually falling into the purview of positive psychology. And so what he did was to develop this model as a way to actually help people understand these particular concepts in a better way. And that's really how this model, Sailboat Metaphor, came about. Trina? The other element that he wishes to do is to actually look at the balanced approach. And we will see what that balanced approach means as we go through the model. So let's start by looking at the 8 elements of the boat. Okay, so this is the first part. And then you'll see here that what are the 8 parts? Trina, please just keep clicking so we can see all the 8 parts, and then we will go into it one at a time. So there are the 8 parts, and you will notice that they are symbolized, represented by icons surrounding the sailboat. All right. So let's go through each one at a time, and I'll try to explain it. So the first one, represented by waves, and it's actually highlighted in yellow. It's the yellow sector, refers to water. What does water refer to here? Water refers to the direct environment in which we live or interact in. Rina, please just keep clicking. Yes, and one more. It also refers to our direct reality. And in some languages, in some terminologies, it actually talks about the different life domains. What do we mean by our different life domains? Examples would be like when we are talking about our work, that would be a specific life domain. When we talk about family, we are talking about another life domain. We can talk about our finance, our health, these are the different life domains that we have. Our spiritual life, that would also be representing a different life domain. So when we talk about water here, it could be any of those. We could be referring to any of those different life domains that we experience as part of as a human person. Okay, so that's number one. Let's move to the second element. Second element is actually represented by a compass. And in this one, we are actually referring to using a compass to represent our emotions and feelings. Emotions and feelings. But we all know that a compass is used for navigation and orientation. It's a valuable guide for our journey. So how are the two interrelated? How do we connect compass with emotions and feelings? Well, one definition of emotions and feelings is that it's actually feedback. It is data. The common challenge that many of us have, or almost all of us have, is that when we actually are overwhelmed by our feelings or emotions, we are compelled to act. We feel compelled to act in a particular way, but that is not necessarily the case. As I said, some psychologists, actually well-known psychologists, have defined emotions and feelings basically as feedback, as data. It's just informing us of something. And sometimes that something is a need that's not being met. So that's a compass. That's what we mean by a compass. Let's move to the third element. The third element is a steering wheel. A sailboat would normally have a steering wheel. And in this particular model, a steering wheel represents our personal values. What are our personal values? Just like a steering wheel in a sailboat, it helps us set our general direction in life. It is where we want our life to be about. So that's what you mean. That's why we're connecting personal values, things that we value, to the symbol of a steering wheel in a sailboat. Okay, moving forward to the fourth element. As you can see, we are actually moving clockwise. The fourth element is called a leak, and interestingly enough, it is represented in the icon by the symbol of a boy, or if you want it in British pronunciation, buoy. Okay, so it's represented by a life buoy. And what does that mean? Well, in element number 4, the leak, it actually refers to a personal characteristic that we might have that reduces our well-being. It interferes, it prevents us from pursuing our preferred course in life. So this could be issues that we deal with. For example, maybe low self-confidence, or maybe we like to worry, or we like to procrastinate. So these are perhaps characteristics or habits that we have developed that could prevent us, or that may be preventing us from pursuing our goal in life. And that's what we mean by a leak. Right? Let's move to element number 5. Element number 5, on the other hand, represents the reverse. It's actually representing our strengths, what we perceive to be our strengths. So these are our personal characteristics that promote our well-being and our ability to cope with the different experiences that we encounter in life. So perhaps we consider, for example, a quick decision making, or strong level of confidence, or perseverance as personal characteristics that are our strengths. So those would fall under this category, the sales, which is element number 5. And then let's move to number 6. Number 6, as you can see, is represented by clouds, dark clouds, as well as the sun. And it's called the weather. Because indeed, when you talk about the weather, sometimes we have pleasant weather, sometimes we have not so pleasant weather, challenging weather, like what we had just a while ago. We had thunderstorm here in the south. So I was a little bit concerned about how it would affect the power and the internet for our webinar. And similarly, using metaphor, uh, we encounter similar things in life. Not all our experiences, the events that we encounter are actually pleasant. No? We have, for example, pleasant events, you get promoted, you get married, you have a family, and all of those nice things. But there are also challenging events. You know, somebody gets sick, you lose your job, especially during this pandemic environment. So those can be challenging events. So these are all part of life events that we all encounter, that we are all prone to experience at some point in our lives. And that's what we mean by the weather. And moving on to element number 7, we talk about other boats. So when we talk about other boats, it's referring to our social relationships, other people that we interact with, the bonds that we establish, both with those that are supportive and unsupportive relationships or bonds that we have. There are those relationships that we consider to be supportive, and again, it's contextual. And there are those where perhaps in a particular context, we would not necessarily consider to be unsupportive. And that's represented here by element number 7, which is other boats. And moving to the last element for the sailboat part is the map. The map represents our goal, our desired state. And in this particular case, we can be talking about long-term goal. We can also be talking about short-term or some specific goal. So both are applicable. It really depends on how we actually make use of the metaphor itself, of the tool. So those are the 8 elements that we have for the sailboat part. Now we'll move to the other part, which is the captain. As I said earlier, the captain is represented by the captain's hat. And what does it represent? Well, the captain typically is one you consider to be the master of the boat. And in this particular case, using our model, the captain interacts with the various elements of the sailboat, as we will see later on, as in our exercise. And the captain is actually the one that is symbolizing autonomy. So going back to the quote that we had from Ms. Goodrich, it actually symbolizes or represents or implies that the captain is really the one in charge of the boat. And that is why we use this particular metaphor or symbolism. Although I must admit, sometimes we fail to actually recognize our role as the master or the captain of our life. Okay, well, just like the sailboat, the captain also has 4 key elements. And let's go through each one. Let's go through the 4 elements first. So one is attention. Second refers to thoughts. The third is motivation. And the last one is action. So let's go to the first one, represented by an eye. And you'll see that in the sector that's in blue. Okay. How and how much attention, actually, how and how much one focuses on a certain element of the sailboat. So where are you focusing among the 8 elements that we talked about in the sailboat? It talks about where the captain is focusing his attention. So that's what we mean by the attention element. Let's move to the second one, Rina. The second one, represented by a thought bubble, represents our thoughts, our beliefs, the beliefs that we have, that we hold about the different elements in the sailboat. And moving to the next one is motivation, okay, represented by the hand, the pointing hand. So motivation here talks about our reasons for interacting with an element in a sailboat in a particular way. So what motivates us to focus or to focus on a particular element? And then the last one is the hand, also talking about the direct way that the captain interacts with any of the different elements on the sailboat. So let's show Trina the complete. There's one more just to summarize it. So the captain and the four elements are represented by attention, thought, motivation, and action, and forming an acronym called ATMA. Incidentally, Atma is a word in Hindu that refers to personal soul or self, which is manifested in consciousness. So I guess at this point, maybe we can go back to the discussion on self-reflection. Why is this going to help us in self-reflection, and why is self-reflection important? Well, let's start by talking a little bit about what we mean by self-reflection. When we are practicing self-reflection, we are actually going into an activity of thinking about our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors, and the reasons that may lie behind them. So it's as if, like, when we are in the process of self-reflection, it's as if you can say that it's like we're looking inward, or maybe we're looking at ourselves in a mirror, looking at things internally. Another way that self-reflection has actually been described is using the idea that we can actually step out of ourselves, as if you are talking to another person when in fact you're talking to yourself, and to examine the experience that you have actually had from a neutral standpoint, or at least you try to establish it, to examine it from a neutral standpoint. That's what we mean by self-reflection. Now, the value of self-reflection is that it's an important foundation to be able to create self-awareness. So how we develop self-awareness is through the practice of self-reflection. And the way we get, and when we have create self-awareness, then we become more aware of our thoughts, the consequences of our thoughts and our actions. We get to know ourselves a little bit better, in other words. Now, the challenge actually in today's world is that while this is important, to be able to self-reflect requires something of an important piece, which is to be able to have quiet moments. And why is that difficult these days? My view is that this is something that has become difficult for many of us, or even all of us perhaps these days. Why? I can think of two reasons. One is that we have been so busy. Many of us have been so busy. And nowadays, some people actually even interpret busyness as a badge of success. In other words, if you are very busy, you must be successful. We all know that that's not necessarily the case. So that's the first one. The second one is that we live in a world that is very much distracted. The internet, our gadgets, our devices effectively keep us on all the time. Almost all of our waking hours, we're always on. We're always distracted. In fact, I would ask many of you to think about how much time you're able to devote to yourself in silence, not looking at your cell phone, not looking at your tablet, and really devoting on yourself on some kind of a mindfulness exercise, if you will. That's a challenge these days. So one of the prerequisites to be able to use the tool really resides in being able to develop that habit of setting aside time for self-reflection. Maybe this is something that you'll be able to do at least once a day at the end of the day, or whenever you go through some kind of an experience, because it has also been established that learning happens through reflection. When you go through an experience, if you want to really learn from it, you would need to stop and digest mentally what you have just gone through, understand what was meaningful for you, or maybe what you would continue doing or stop doing or start doing, and then you implement that the next opportunity that you have. So that's similar to actually what we're talking about when we talk about reflection. Okay, so we'll skip this note because I've already emphasized this part about every person is a captain of his life. Although we don't always recognize or maybe even practice that, and that's one of our challenges. So this slide actually tells you, provides you the complete elements of the captain and the sailboat, and I think this is what you have as a handout, right? So we will now, perhaps you might be still scratching your head saying, how can I absorb all of this? There's a lot to absorb. Don't worry, we will be using some exercises now. I'll be demonstrating how it can actually be used. And you can see that a lot of it really is something that can be intuitive in a way. So we'll go to the exercise at this point. Let's move to the next slide, Trina. Okay, so we will do a translation. As I said, resilience or resiliency is a topic that you actually have as part of positive psychology. And one element of building resilience is actually to make use of your social support. So how would you actually demonstrate making use of social support using the sailboat metaphor? And Trina, if you could just click one more time so that the other circles show up. So you'll notice here that making use of social support is represented by the hand, okay, the action, I should say, the action in the captain, and other sailboats, the other boats in the sailboat part. So you're using, because of the word making use and social support. So that's how you would normally represent the concept of making use of social support using the sailboat metaphor, the hand, the action, and other boats. Let's go to another example, still on resiliency. The second example, also on resiliency, another element is actually being able to deal with internal stressors. So when you're dealing with internal stressors, how do you represent that in the sailboat metaphor? You represent that also by action and your leak. So you can see here, I hope you can see the two elements that are actually encircled. So you'll have one element in the captain, and then another element in the sailboat that you would combine to represent the idea or the concept of dealing with internal stressors. Okay, I hope you're starting to get used to how it's actually being applied. Okay, let's have one more translation. Okay, again, still on resiliency. Another element or factor of resiliency is to cognitively reappraise stressful events as less threatening. What does that mean? It is actually another way of saying it is that you are shifting your perspective on a stressful, what you would consider to be a stressful event, so that it will actually appear to be less threatening. So how do you represent that using the sailboat metaphor? Is you make use of the thought in the captain and the weather in the sailboat. Okay. Let's move to the next one. Hopefully it's getting clearer now. So those were using, we made use of the sailboat metaphor to actually translate concepts. Actually, these are concepts in positive psychology, but you probably have used or encountered the word resilience before, because that's become a popular term. Okay, so now we will get into a little bit more specific rather than conceptual. So in this particular case, how do we translate the term, the expression, lack of meaning in life using the sailboat metaphor? I hope you're able to follow using the guide. Okay. Give you a few seconds to at least try and think of how you might do that. How would you express lack of meaning in life using the sailboat metaphor? Okay. So let's compare notes. And one answer to that is shown here. You could just click 2 times again, Trina. All right. So one way of representing that is, let's go back a bit. One more. Let's go back a little. All right. So in that particular case, the meaning in life is actually represented by the thought and the compass. Let's move to the next one. So another expression, inability to deal with difficult events. How would you express inability to deal with difficult events using the sailboat metaphor? Okay. One way of expressing that or translating that is in the next slide. Trina, please. Okay. Oops. Oh. Go back one slide, please. There you go. So it's represented by action and and the weather. All right. And let's go to the next examples. I'm just giving you some examples. Later on, we will actually do a few, time permitting, and I'll let you tell me what your answers would be. So how would you describe the expression personal strengths used at work? So using your personal strengths at work. I'll give you a bit of time to think about your answer. Few seconds. And Trina, let's show them one answer to this. Okay. So this one is quite easy. Using personal strengths at work. So you're talking about action and your strengths. Right? And I think we have one last example before we go to the exercise. Confident about your ability to reach goals. When you are feeling confident about your ability to reach your goals, how would you translate that expression using the sailboat metaphor? Okay. Okay, let's show them one answer. And that would be the thought and the map or the destination using the terminology. So it's the thought, your thought, and the destination. The destination represents your goal or desired state, and you have your thought, which is your belief. Okay, so I've given you hopefully sufficient examples on how to use the metaphor. Now it's your turn to actually give it a try. We have 3, I think we still have time, so we can use all 3 exercises here. Now I'll need you to type your responses. So basically there will be two two words, if you will. One would be the element that you would use for the captain, and the other element would be coming from the sailboat to represent this. So if your friend, for example, would say, I don't feel like my boat is moving. It is floating in one place, bobbing on the waves. So your friend now is, this is reverse, right? The friend is the one using the sailboat metaphor. What would that actually mean? How would you represent that? I don't feel like my boat is moving. It is floating in one place, bobbing on the waves. You can just try to imagine the boat. So it's not going anywhere. It is just simply floating up and down, going with the waves. Anybody? Can I see some answers? Do I have a brave soul who will dare? Maybe you can even unmute your mic and just call out the answer. Anyone? Okay. Okay, we have an answer from Carla. Motivation. So motivation and water. All right. And then we have Errol, and his answer is motivation and steering wheel with a question mark. Okay. Any more? Okay, thank you for those answers. Actually, if we had an opportunity to get people, if you're either Carla or Flynn would be, or Errol would be willing to unmute themselves, I'd really be interested to get their perspective on why they, thought of representing this with the motivation and the water, or the motivation and the steering wheel. Um, those are possible answers. In fact, my answer would be thought and the steering wheel. Okay. Oh, okay. Veronica, we have the same answer. So thank you. But motivation and water, motivation and steering wheel could be answers as well. Right? Because now, when you were choosing which metaphor, which element to use, you are now connecting it into a context. So not everything is actually expressed in this quote, but then you may be making some contextual assumptions that will influence how you will represent this in the metaphor. So it's not necessarily not necessarily one right answer, because context becomes important when you start using this. Good, thank you very much. Let's move to the next one. Trina, let's move to the next example. Okay. So what about if your friend, you hear your friend say this, I feel like I'm sailing in a direction that other sailors want to sail. I feel like I'm sailing in a direction that other sailors want me to sail. So Seni made the suggestion here that for thought she would use the use of a different icon of the saguan. Thank you very much for that suggestion, Seni. We'll consider that, and then I can call this something else, maybe the bangka metaphor. Okay, any answers? Can we hear from others? I feel like I'm sailing in a direction that other sailors want me to sail. what element of the captain would you choose, and what element of the sailboat would you choose to represent this? Okay, we have an answer here. Action and other boats. Yep. Thank you, Errol. Oh wow, si Errol ulit. Okay. And we have Millie. Thoughts, other boats. Yeah. So the other boats is sort of a giveaway because you're talking about other sailors. So you have a clue there. Yep. Thank you. So I also had, just for your info, I also had thought and other boats, or action and other boats. So very similar. So are a number of ways you can actually represent this. Depends on the context that you have behind that expression. Okay, Veronica got it also. Good. And then we have the last one. So we have enough time for any questions. Trina, let's move to the last statement. Okay. I am afraid that my boat will not withstand the stormy weather that is coming. How would you represent that using the sailboat metaphor?
I am afraid.
Some of you are already getting used to it. I can see from your responses. Okay, anyone? I guess the element in the sailboat is sort of a giveaway, or is a giveaway. What you need to decide is your element for the captain. Okay, we have several answers. Thoughts and the wave from June or Malu. Nina says it's thought and the weather. Same with Errol, thought and the weather. Yes, I also had thought and the weather, or attention and the weather. Okay, so hopefully that helps you get a better feel for that, for the use of the tool. Okay, so that in essence would be how we would use the sailboat metaphor, particularly the elements of the captain and the sailboat. Now there's the third piece, which is the lighthouse, which is not part of our exercise, and the reason for that is because the lighthouse represents. Trina, please just keep clicking so we get to see all the other elements of this slide. Okay. So in this particular model, the lighthouse actually represents the practitioner. That's the helper, no? And the helper is there to provide the temporary aid to the other person experiencing that journey. So it helps operate. He helps operate in service of the boat's journey, and helps clarify the current position of the boat, as well as the environment of the boat. And that's really been that is really the role of the helper, or the practitioner, as we call it. And what do we mean by practitioner here? Like I said, this model was developed for the helping profession, and you're talking about this model being used by coaches, therapists, counselors, and the like, to be able to be of service to their particular clients. But I believe that we can actually learn to make use of the sailboat metaphor without automatically resorting to the use of a lighthouse. And what the next two slides simply just gives you an idea of what the lighthouse does, right? So on a temporary basis, as mentioned in the previous slide, the lighthouse serves as your tugboat that helps clarify or guide temporarily your sailboat. Another way of looking at it is something that we can probably connect with, is that your lighthouse also provides some guidance to your sailboat as it journeys through life, and that's the particular role of those who are in the helping profession. So in essence, when if the okay, just keep yes, can you please click? Okay, just a quick point to close our session. When you talk about the use of a model such as the sailboat metaphor, something to keep in mind is that the map is not the territory. What that simply means is that just be aware that you are using a model, and by definition, a model is used to eliminate or simplify things, right? If you remember the intention of Dr. Alberts to simplify the different concepts that are present in positive psychology. So same here in this particular case, when you make use of the sailboat model, you are using it to simplify. Obviously, life is far more complicated, but using the model allows us to focus on the most important elements. So that if you are not able to, of course, make use of this, there is always that other recourse for you to actually engage the services of a helping professional, such as a coach, a therapist, a psychologist, to be able to help you make use of understand your situation or deal with the presenting issue that you have in a more effective manner. And with that, just to summarize it, Tina, let's move to the next slide. Okay. Last three things that I'd like to mention to close. Like I said, it's important to develop the habit of self-reflection. Spend time, devote time, not only when you have time, but because you'll never have time. It is when you have to devote time for self-reflection, maybe at least one time a day before you end the day. When you do that, you can use the tool like this sailboat metaphor, and you can combine it with journaling, writing down your thoughts to help you examine your day. You know, what was positive, what went well, what you were not happy with in your day. That helps you understand, you know, what you would do better, or what does it reveal to you about yourself, and that's what you do. But you will need to do that deliberately and develop that as a habit for you to be able to make use of the tools such as a sailboat metaphor, so that you can use for self-reflection to create greater self-awareness and also for your own learning. And sometimes, if doing it yourself does not help you solve the situation, then you may want to consider the use of a helper, a practitioner, to understand yourself and your situation better, and so that you can then find the solution. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your very engaged participation, and I think have enough time to close to answer any questions from the floor.
Hi, good evening. I just wanted to ask specifically on the differentiation between attention and thoughts. Like, what's the best way to delineate the two?
Oh, yes. When you talk about attention, it's really what you're focusing on, and normally it is about any of the 8 elements in the sailboat metaphor. Now, when you use thoughts, it means you are incorporating a belief. You are talking about a particular belief. For example, you would have some kind of an idea of that particular element. So, for example, when you talk about a life event, then maybe that life event, if you have a different, a negative belief on that, so that belief already influences your view of that particular element. Whereas if you talk about attention, you're simply focusing it. You're not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily contain a particular belief to any of the elements. It's really just what you're focusing on. For example, you may be focusing on your emotions, or you may be focusing on which sometimes happens to all of us, right? We can get triggered, and when we're triggered, our focus becomes very narrow. We get so focused on how we are actually feeling. So then it becomes an attention to your compass. I hope I sort of gave some clarity to that distinction between the I, or the attention, and the thought.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Any other question?
Me?
Okay.
You hear me?
June, is that you?
Yeah, I'm not sure if you can hear me, Bench. The question in the chat box is the lighthouse like the North Star?
In a way, but the North Star, as we refer that, normally is more related to your guiding principles. So when you talk about your guiding principles, it's actually falling into your values, which in this particular case for the sailboat, that would actually refer to one particular element of your sailboat, right? So that's different. Whereas in the lighthouse typically represents another person. In fact, that other person could also be, doesn't necessarily have to be a practitioner, could also be your friend. The only problem is that the lighthouse would normally serve to be a neutral person, and oftentimes some of our friends, because of their sincere desire to help, are not necessarily neutral. They would either tend to be encouraging or supportive, and therefore they're not always in a position to distance themselves and be objective. That's the catch. But you may have some friends who are able to do that, and that's great. That can be, they can serve as that lighthouse for you. So it's a temporary support, because otherwise you don't want to get dependent. Yeah, that's the challenge there, right? It's if you're always going to be relying on your lighthouse, that's not positive. That's going to encourage a dependence relationship, which is not good. Even for coaches, that's not really the whole idea. It's an idea of empowering you as the client to be able to develop your awareness, your confidence in yourself, and to address your issues by yourself. Because that's from a coaching standpoint, that is the basic principle of a coach. The basic principle of a coach is that you have to assume that your coaching client, is actually smart and capable to address their issues. It's just that they need some help from time to time. Thank you for that question. I guess if there are no more questions, and since we are already at about the end of the hour.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, June, go ahead.
Yeah, I know it's 8 o'clock, but I'm not sure if you have time to very quickly answer one question. I know you made reference to this earlier. The question is, where does the concept of a higher being, particularly in the one's spiritual life, enter in the elements of a sailboat metaphor? Benji?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I asked that myself when I went through this. I guess the answer to that is that it's not really been factored in, because this is something that's formulated from a scientific standpoint. However, one way I was able to adjust, I guess, is that you remember that in the sailboat metaphor, there is that bubble which talks about your belief. So in that particular case, if part of your belief or if you believe your spiritual life, you believe in a higher being, a powerful being, a God, then that bubble, that thought bubble, which represents beliefs, will incorporate that, and that becomes part of how you will actually use. That's how you will be able to use the sailboat, because you can incorporate that belief in a higher power as you go through that. Because at the end of the day, when we talk about the sailboat, the captain being the master of his life, that is in essence true. Like from a Christian standpoint, if you don't mind my speaking from that perspective, that is in essence true, because we have been given free will. Now it is up to us to actually how we use the free will, our free will. So that's how I would actually incorporate the spiritual side in this particular sailboat metaphor. I hope that's you found that helpful.
Thank you, Benji. So with that comment, I guess this, although the use of positive psychology is at the center of this, it is not devoid of our spirituality. That is something that is at core of our being and who we are. So thank you for that, Benji. We would like to ask for your forgiveness that we overshot time a little bit, but at this point, we'd like to say thank you very much to Benji and express our appreciation. Albeit the time was limited, but certainly we hope that this was of much help to all of you here. So in closing, we just would like to say, so that we don't miss out, please subscribe to www.powerinu.com.ph to get updates on events, webinars, and free resources from POWERinU and our partners. Thank you for joining us in our complimentary webinar, and we look forward to you joining us again on July 6th for the webinar called Figuring Out Strategy, a Game Plan for Life. Now, we've often heard about the importance for leaders to spend time in developing and leading strategy. The voices we hear in talent leadership discussions echo the question, is the talent strategic? However, we seem to have lost the plot or the ability to even clearly define what strategy or being strategic truly mean. Like most big words in business, we got lost in our jargon and our commercial speak. So in this July 6th webinar, Bobby Asprey will share his experience and lessons on strategy. As he shares his view on the meaning and essence of this word, he invites you to reflect and ponder on the ability to make choices, analyze, articulate, and follow through on strategy. Moreover, he will share his journey on how he realized the critical nature of strategic thought, not just in business, but in how we live our lives. Now, everyone who registered in this webinar will automatically get an email invite to that July 6th webinar, so watch out. And lastly, everyone can access the recording of this webinar through our POWERinU website, Facebook page, and YouTube channel. Please take a moment before we officially end, 10 seconds, to please answer the short poll so that we can get your feedback on this webinar. Or you can scan the QR code in the screen or click the link in the chat. Your responses will help us further improve, so we thank you in advance. Thank you, everyone. Good day, good evening, good night for joining us in this webinar, and see you on July 6th. Thank you.